Everybody knows the giants, the good, the bad, and the ugly, the wild bunch, once upon a time in the West. This isn't a list about those. The 1960s were the last great decade of the Western, the genre's final golden age before it faded.
I've seen the other side of your face.
And it produced far more than a handful of famous classics. Buried underneath the legends are dozens of brilliant, brutal, beautiful Westerns that most people have completely forgotten. These are the deep cuts, the ones only real fans of the genre still ride for. So if you think you know your Westerns, let's find out. Here are 20 from the 1960s that separate the true believers from everyone else, starting at number 20. Number 20. The Great Silence, 1968. We start with a film so bleak and so beautiful that it was buried in America for 50 years. The Great Silence is a spaghetti western, but unlike any you've seen, because it's set in a frozen, snowbound frontier instead of a dusty desert. A mute gunfighter, known only as Silence, rides into a mountain town, terrorized by a pack of bounty hunters, led by one of the coldest, most reptilian villains ever put on film, played by the legendary Klaus Kinski. Silence can't speak, but his guns say everything. The director, Sergio Corbucci, wrapped the whole thing in a haunting Ennio Morricone score that the composer himself considered among his very best work. And the ending, which I won't spoil, is so shockingly bleak that American distributors refused to release the film for decades, and it only reached most US audiences 50 years later. If you've seen Tarantino's The Hateful Eight, you've seen its shadow because he borrowed heavily from this. A genuine masterpiece that almost nobody outside the diehards has seen. Number 19. Death Rides a Horse, 1967.
Find 4 men and kill them.
Here's one you may not know by name, but you've absolutely heard, and I'll explain that in a second. Death Rides a Horse is a revenge western built on one of the genre's most primal setups. As a boy, Bill watches a gang murder his entire family, memorizing a scar here, a piece of jewelry there, on each of the killers. 15 years later, he's a lethal marksman hunting them down one by one. Along the way, he crosses paths with Ryan, a grizzled ex-con played by the great Lee Van Cleef, who's chasing the same men for his own reasons, and who knows far more about Bill's past than he lets on. The uneasy alliance between the boyish Avenger and the weathered old gunslinger is the heart of it. But here's the part true fans love. The Ennio Morricone score is so good that Quentin Tarantino lifted its main theme directly and dropped it into Kill Bill decades later. You've heard this movie whether you know it or not, and the film it came from is well worth the ride. Number 18. 5 Card Stud, 1968. Here's a western that's secretly an Agatha Christie murder mystery, and that odd combination is exactly why it's worth rediscovering. In a small frontier town, a group of men lynch a card cheat one night, and then, one by one, every man who took part in that lynching starts turning up dead, each killed by a different grisly method. Dean Martin plays the gambler who tried to stop the hanging, and now finds himself playing detective, a sort of Western Sherlock Holmes, trying to figure out who's picking off the killers before he's next. And into this tense little town rides one of the great character touches in any Western. Robert Mitchum as a preacher who's just arrived to reopen the abandoned church, all warmth and scripture on the surface, but hiding a derringer inside a hollowed-out Bible. Directed by Henry Hathaway, who'd make True Grit the very next year. It's a stylish, Hitchcock-flavored whodunit dressed in spurs and 6 guns. I won't say who's behind the killings, but the way it plays out is a treat. Number 17. Sabata, 1969.
And a look. That means you're dead before you draw.
If the last one was a murder mystery in disguise, this one is basically a comic book superhero movie, a decade before those existed. Sabata stars the great Lee Van Cleef as a mysterious, black-clad gunslinger with almost supernatural aim and a personal arsenal of trick weapons, including a tiny derringer that somehow fires 4 barrels. He rides into a Texas town where the respectable rich men have secretly robbed an army safe, and he sets about outsmarting and blackmailing every one of them. What makes it a cult favorite is the sheer style and playfulness. The action is acrobatic and circus-like, full of characters vaulting over rooftops, and Sabata's allies include a mute Indian acrobat and a wandering musician named Banjo, whose banjo conceals a hidden rifle. Fans lovingly call it a comic book western, and the contrast between the deadly serious Van Cleef and the gleeful absurdity around him is the whole charm. It was a big enough hit to spawn 2 sequels, one of them starring Yul Brynner. Pure, stylish, spaghetti western fun. Number 16. Duel at Diablo, 1966. This one paired 2 major stars in ways audiences had never seen, and it was far more brutal than anything the Western had dared just a few years earlier. James Garner, fresh off his run as the charming card sharp on Maverick, plays completely against type here, as a grim, vengeance-driven scout hunting the men who murdered his wife. And alongside him is Sidney Poitier, one of the biggest stars in the world, in his very first Western, playing a slick, cigar-chewing ex-cavalryman turned horse trader. What's striking is that the film never once mentions the color of Poitier's skin. It just lets him be cool and capable, which was quietly radical for 1966. The movie itself is tough as nails, a cavalry versus Apache siege story packed with action so violent it was criticized in newspapers and actually cut in several countries. The director defended every frame as necessary. If you only know Garner as the easygoing charmer, seeing him this hard-edged is reason enough to watch, and the star pairing alone makes it a fascinating time capsule. Number 15. The Shooting, 1966.
How'd you like the way I done Leland drum? Like I say, I'll blow it off the first word out. Go sit down over there.
Now for something truly strange, a Western that plays more like an anxiety dream than an adventure. Made for a mere $75,000 by cult director Monte Hellman, The Shooting follows a former bounty hunter and his simple-minded partner, who are hired by a cold, mysterious woman who won't say her name or explain where they're going. She just pays them to lead her deep into the desert, towards some unspecified target. Then, a 4th rider joins them, a black-clad, sadistic gunslinger who seems to enjoy tormenting the group, played by a young Jack Nicholson years before he was a star, and who also co-produced the film. As they ride further into the emptiness, the movie strips away everything you expect from a Western and becomes a spare, dread-soaked meditation on fate and violence, building to one of the most cryptic and debated endings in the entire genre. It's the kind of movie people argue about for hours afterward. Existential, eerie, and utterly unlike anything else on this list. A true cinephile's Western. Number 14. Firecreek, 1968. Here's a fascinating one for anyone who loves classic Hollywood, because it does something these 2 legends almost never did. It puts James Stewart and Henry Fonda on opposite sides of a gun. Stewart and Fonda were best friends in real life for decades, but they rarely shared the screen, and here they don't just share it, they face off as enemies. Stewart plays a mild, decent, part-time sheriff of a tiny nowhere town, a farmer who wears a tin star his own son hammered out for him, a man who's never had to be anything but gentle. Then Fonda rides in leading a gang of wounded, restless gunmen, and cast completely against type as the cold, quietly menacing villain. As the outlaws take over the town and its cowardly citizens look the other way, the peaceful sheriff is slowly pushed toward a stand he never wanted to make. It's a slow burn in the high noon tradition, and the final half hour is terrific. The reason to seek it out is that face-off, 2 of the most beloved actors who ever lived, lifelong friends, finally squaring off, with Fonda playing against everything audiences loved him for. Number 13. Hour of the Gun, 1967.
Tom McLaury threw back his coat lapel to show that he was unarmed, and that's when the Earps and Holiday opened fire.
Almost every movie about the gunfight at the OK Corral builds up to the shootout as its climax. This one is bold enough to open with it, and then spend the rest of the film on the dark, ugly thing that happened next. Director John Sturges had already made a famous, crowd-pleasing version of this story a decade earlier, but he was never satisfied with it, feeling it was too clean, too Hollywood. So he came back and made this, essentially his own grim correction. James Garner plays Wyatt Earp, and this is not the noble lawman of legend. After his brothers are ambushed, Earp abandons the badge and the law entirely and becomes a cold, methodical avenger, hunting the Clanton gang down one by one, drifting from justice into something much closer to murder. Jason Robards is wonderful as a witty, dying Doc Holliday, riding along beside him. Watch for a very young Jon Voight in an early role, and a driving score by the great Jerry Goldsmith. It's one of the first westerns to look at Wyatt Earp and ask whether the hero is really a hero at all, and that revisionist edge makes it feel far ahead of its time. Number 12, Nevada Smith, 1966.
Some men kill because they have to, and some because they like to. It takes both kinds to make a story.
Here's a western with one of the strangest origin stories on this whole list. Steve McQueen, at the absolute peak of his fame after The Great Escape, headlines his first solo star vehicle, playing a young man whose parents are brutally murdered by 3 outlaws. He sets out to hunt all 3 down, learning to shoot, learning to kill, transforming from an innocent kid into a hardened gunfighter, one killing at a time. It's a classic slow burn revenge tale, elevated by a stacked supporting cast of Carl Malden, Brian Keith, and Arthur Kennedy. But here's the fascinating part for film buffs. Nevada Smith is a prequel, and not to another western. It's a prequel to The Carpetbaggers, a glossy melodrama about the Hollywood movie business, spun off from a single supporting character who appeared as an old man in that film. So this gritty, violent revenge western exists because someone decided to tell the teenage backstory of a minor character from a completely unrelated drama about show business. It shouldn't work as well as it does, and McQueen's star power carries the whole strange, compelling thing. Number 11, Rio Conchos, 1964. This is a tough, mean, surprisingly brutal western that feels years ahead of its 1964 release, and it's notable for launching a genuine icon. The plot sends a scruffy, mismatched group on a dangerous mission into Mexico to recover a shipment of stolen repeating rifles before they can be sold to Apache renegades by a deranged ex-Confederate colonel who still dreams of resurrecting the South. Richard Boone anchors it with a ferocious performance as a bitter, hate-filled Confederate veteran, one of the great nasty anti-heroes of the era. But the reason this one belongs on any true fan's radar is the man making his very first film appearance in it. Jim Brown, the greatest running back in football history, stepping off the gridiron and onto the screen for the first time as a cavalry sergeant. He barely speaks, but his sheer presence is undeniable. And this quiet debut launched him toward becoming one of the first black action stars in Hollywood. Add a driving Jerry Goldsmith score and violence far harsher than audiences expected in 1964, and you've got a genuinely underrated gem. Number 10, The Stalking Moon, 1968. This one plays less like a traditional western and more like a tightly wound Hitchcock thriller in the desert, and it comes from a serious pedigree. Gregory Peck reunited here with Robert Mulligan, the director who'd guided him to his Oscar in To Kill a Mockingbird, along with that film's producer, Alan J. Pakula. Peck plays a retiring Army scout who agrees to escort a rescued captive woman, played by Eva Marie Saint, and her young son to safety. But the boy's father is a feared, almost mythic figure who wants his son back and will follow them anywhere, killing everyone in his path. The genius of the film is restraint. You barely ever see the pursuer. He's a shadow, a sound, a body left behind, an unseen menace closing in, and the final 40 minutes become a nearly wordless siege at Peck's isolated ranch, thick with dread. It's spare, atmospheric, and genuinely nerve-wracking. A mood piece disguised as a western. If you like slow building tension over gunfights, this one gets under your skin. Number 9, Lonely Are the Brave, 1962.
He stood alone, towering over all who would hunt him down.
Here's a film that its own star called the best he ever made, and coming from Kirk Douglas, who made Spartacus and Paths of Glory. That's saying something. Lonely Are the Brave is a Western with a heartbreaking twist. It's set in the present day. Douglas plays Jack Burns, a fiercely independent cowboy who still lives by the old code, riding his horse through a modern world of highways, helicopters, and barbed wire that has no place for him anymore. After he breaks out of jail to stay free, he flees on horseback into the mountains, pursued by a sympathetic sheriff played by Walter Matthau in a manhunt that pits the last true cowboy against the relentless machinery of modern life. The script was written by Dalton Trumbo, the once blacklisted genius behind Spartacus, and it turns a simple chase into a moving meditation on freedom and the death of the Old West. Douglas considered Jack Burns the role of his life, and the ending stays with you long after. Watch for a young George Kennedy along the way, a quiet, aching masterpiece that deserves to be far better known. Number 8, Hang 'em High, 1968.
He's treed! Blast him! I hear about this, not just in the territories, but in Washington.
When Clint Eastwood came home, this is the movie he chose, and it changed his whole career. After 3 spaghetti westerns in Italy turned an unknown TV actor into a global icon, Eastwood returned to America a star. And for his first Hollywood western, he picked this hard, violent revenge tale. He plays a man who's wrongly accused of cattle rustling and lynched by a mob of 9, left hanging, and then cut down alive at the last second. He survives, pins on a lawman's badge, and sets out to bring in every man who strung him up. What makes it historically huge for fans is what happened behind the scenes. This was the very first film from Malpazzo, Eastwood's own production company, the outfit that would give him total creative control for the rest of his career and eventually produce Unforgiven and $1 Million Baby. And it was a monster hit, recording the single biggest opening weekend in United Artists history at the time, outgrossing even the James Bond films. Watch closely for a young Bruce Dern and Dennis Hopper. This is the movie where Eastwood, the mogul, was born. Number 7, Major Dundee, 1965.
I am going to kill you.
Major Dundee.
This is one of the most famous what could have been stories in all of Western cinema, a masterpiece that the studio tore to pieces. Directed by Sam Peckinpah, riding high after Ride the High Country, it's an ambitious Civil War epic starring Charlton Heston as a driven Union officer who assembles a ragtag command of Union soldiers and Confederate prisoners, uneasy enemies forced to ride together, on an obsessive hunt into Mexico after a band of Apache raiders. Richard Harris co-stars as the Confederate officer who hates him, but the making of it became a nightmare. The studio, terrified Peckinpah was out of control, slashed his budget and schedule, then took the film away from him and hacked it to pieces in the editing room. Peckinpah disowned the result. Here's the detail that shows you how much they believed in it. Charlton Heston, furious at the studio's meddling, gave up his entire salary for the film to try to keep Peckinpah on the project, an almost unheard of sacrifice. For decades only, the butchered version existed, until a longer restoration finally appeared in 2005. Even in wounded form, it's a fascinating, muscular epic and one of the great tantalizing glimpses of a masterpiece that was almost allowed to exist. Number 6, Will Penny, 1968.
Will heats up slow, but when he gets there, he's hell with a hide-off.
Here is Charlton Heston like you have never seen him. Heston built his fame playing giants, Moses parting the sea, Ben-Hur, El Cid, larger-than-life legends with that booming voice. In Will Penny, he throws all of that away to play the smallest, most human role of his career, and he called it the finest performance he ever gave. He plays an aging, illiterate, ordinary cowhand, a man near 50 who spent his whole life on the trail, owns nothing, bathes a few times a year, and is slowly realizing that the only life he's ever known is ending and passing him by. When he takes a lonely winter job, guarding a remote mountain line, he stumbles onto a widow and her son squatting in his cabin, and a tentative, tender, unlikely bond begins to form. It's a quiet, melancholy, deeply real portrait of frontier life, with none of the usual heroics, anchored by Heston, stripped of all his grandeur. Watch for Donald Pleasance as a genuinely unsettling madman preacher, and a young Lee Majors in his film debut. It flopped on release, overshadowed that same year by Heston's other movie, Planet of the Apes, but this is the one he was proudest of. Number 5. Hombre, 1967.
Maybe it was the heat of the sun, or the fury of the ambush.
Now we're into the top 5, and this is a lean, tough, quietly furious Western built around one of Paul Newman's most fascinating performances. Newman plays John Russell, a white man raised from childhood by the Apache, who has to cut his hair and rejoin a white society that despises him for it. When he boards a stagecoach with a group of respectable passengers who look down on him, and the coach is robbed, and the group is left stranded in the brutal desert, these same people who scorned him suddenly need him to survive, and he has to decide whether they're worth saving. Newman plays it with almost no dialogue, all coiled stillness and hard stares, letting silence do the work. The film comes from a genuine pedigree. It's based on a novel by the great Elmore Leonard, and it was the 6th and final film Newman made with director Martin Ritt, the same pairing behind a certain film sitting at the top of this list. Richard Boone is superb as the oily villain. It's a bleak, morally serious, revisionist Western that uses the old stagecoach setup to say something much sharper about prejudice and who actually deserves to be saved. Number 4. The Professionals, 1966.
To die for a woman is more foolish. Any woman.
We're into the top 4, and this is one of the great men on a mission westerns, stacked with so much talent it's almost unfair. A wealthy railroad baron hires 4 hardened specialists to ride into revolutionary Mexico and rescue his kidnapped wife from a notorious bandit. And what a 4. Lee Marvin as the steely leader, Burt Lancaster as the grinning explosives expert, Robert Ryan as the horsemaster, and the great Woody Strode as the tracker and bowman. Together, they cross a punishing desert on a mission that seems suicidal, only to discover that nothing about the job is what they were told, and the woman they came to rescue may not want rescuing at all. It's tough, funny, gorgeously shot in the desert by legendary cinematographer Conrad Hall, and driven by a Maurice Jarre score. It earned 3 Academy Award nominations, including Best Director. You can draw a straight line from this film to The Wild Bunch and The Dirty Dozen. The whole rugged, cynical professionals on a doomed job template, endlessly rewatchable and criminally underappreciated today. Number 3. One-Eyed Jacks, 1961. At number 3 is a genuine one-of-a-kind because of who made it. This is the only film Marlon Brando ever directed. The greatest actor of his generation stepped behind the camera exactly once for this brooding, beautiful, deeply strange revenge western, and he never did it again. The story is a classic betrayal tale. Brando plays a bank robber left to rot in a Mexican prison by his partner, played by Karl Malden, who takes the loot and reinvents himself as a respectable California sheriff. Years later, Brando escapes and comes hunting for him, but the backstory is almost as fascinating as the film. It was originally set to be directed by none other than Stanley Kubrick, working from a screenplay by Sam Peckinpah. Both of them eventually departed, and Brando took over the director's chair himself. His famous perfectionism sent the budget spiraling from under $2 million to around $6 million, and the studio ultimately took the final cut away from him. And yet what survives is haunting, moody, and gorgeous. A bridge between the clean old Hollywood Western and the darker revisionist ones to come. Now treasured as a genuine cult classic. Brando directed exactly one movie, and it was this odd, unforgettable thing. Number 2. Ride the High Country, 1962.
In all the stirring legends of the frontier West, there is none as exciting as the reckless saga of the men who pushed the last outposts of civilization.
At number 2 is the film that announced one of the greatest directors the genre ever had, and it did it while quietly saying goodbye to an entire era. Ride the High Country was only Sam Peckinpah's second feature, made years before The Wild Bunch would make him famous and infamous. And it's a gentler, more melancholy film than the bloody classics to come, yet you can feel the greatness already there. It stars two of the classic Western's most beloved aging icons, Joel McCrea and Randolph Scott, as two old, broken-down former lawmen, long past their prime, hired to guard a gold shipment down from the mountains. One of them is quietly planning to betray the other and steal it. What makes the film so moving is that it's really about the end of the Old West itself. Two worn-out men from a vanishing age trying to hold on to their honor in a world that has no more use for them. It was so casually tossed out by the studio that they released it as the bottom half of a double bill, and then critics and audiences overseas recognized it as a masterpiece. Randolph Scott was so certain he'd never top it that he retired from acting for good afterward. Elegiac, beautiful, and deeply felt, it's the film where Peckinpah arrived. Number 1. HUD, 1963.
All right, smart guy, I'll take you instead.
Oh, I don't want to be hoggish. Lon, you want a piece of it?
Well,
If a single film proves the whole point of this list, that some of the greatest westerns of the 1960s are the ones people have half forgotten, it's this. Ask anyone to name Paul Newman's classics, and they'll say Butch Cassidy, Cool Hand Luke, The Sting. Almost nobody says HUD, and HUD might be the best of them all. Here's why it's so easy to overlook. A lot of people don't even realize it's a western. There's not a single gunfight in it. It's a modern western, set on a struggling Texas cattle ranch in the present day, and its battles are fought with words across a kitchen table between 3 generations of a family coming apart. Paul Newman gives what may be the finest performance of his career, and here's what's daring about it. The most charming movie star on the planet uses every bit of that charm to play a genuinely rotten man. HUD is selfish, cruel, and dishonest, and he slowly poisons everyone around him. His principled old father, who despises what his son became, his nephew, who idolizes him and learns the hard way what he really is, and the family's weary housekeeper, played by Patricia Neal, who sees right through him. And the film refuses to redeem him. He isn't punished. He doesn't reform. He just wins. And that ending genuinely disturbed audiences in 1963. It won 3 Academy Awards, for Patricia Neal, for Melvin Douglas, and for James Wong Howe's stark black and white images of the lonely Texas panhandle. It was directed by Martin Ritt, who made Hombre back at number 5, with the same star. HUD helped kill the myth of the noble Western hero, and replace him with something colder and more honest. It's a masterpiece hiding in plain sight, a film everyone's heard of, and far too few have actually seen. And that's exactly why it belongs at number 1 on a list of the Westerns only true film fans remember.